Good day to you, brothers, sisters, friends, and new faces, and welcome to Current Events and Christian Expectations. And today in this podcast, we're going to be talking about how old is too old. We'll lead off with Isaiah 46, verses 3 and 4. We'll have many other scriptures that we reference and read today, and we'll put those in the overview. But with the age of being old at the center of our conversation, let's just dig right in.
Well, good day or evening, as the case may be, to everybody out there in podcast land. When is old too old? That's a debate going on right now concerning the age of President Biden as well as President Trump.
They're both up there.
They're both up there.
Yeah.
Here's a quote from Robert Browning about getting old. "Grow old along with me. The best is yet to be. The last of life for which the first was made." Well, is that true? Is that the way it is with old age? That's some of the things we're looking at. Concerning old age, I'm familiar with it because in 50 years plus of ministry, I have been in nursing homes, I don't know, I've lost count.
Countless times.
Countless times. And know people in the various stages of old age and how they respond, how they act. Sometimes it's hilarious and sometimes it makes you cry. Mr. Trump is 78 years old. Joe Biden is 81. I'm 79, so I'm right in the middle.
You're right in the middle.
To look behind me and look ahead and figure it out. Right.
Yeah.
How old does one have to be president? Well, Constitution says 35. And Theodore Roosevelt still remains our youngest president at the age of 42. Here's a good question for constitutional scholars. Why was there no terminus age limit in the Constitution?
Ooh.
You got to be at least 35, but there's nothing said about the outer limits. Well, think about this. In the 17th century, 18th century, 1700s, colonial America, life expectancy was 35. You get to be president and drop dead.
That's right, if you can make it.
Yeah, exactly. So there are, of course, exceptions. Benjamin Franklin lived to be a good old 84 and was still fairly coherent from what I've read. So that's what we're looking at. Where to begin about this debate over how old is too old, especially to hold a responsible position in government or in culture? Listen to Isaiah 46, verses 3 and 4.
"Listen to me, O house of Jacob, all the remnant of the house of Israel, who have been born by me from before your birth, carried from the womb. Even to your old age I am he, and to gray hairs I will carry you. I have made and I will bear, I will carry and will save."
Yes, he'll take care of us as newborn or as an oldie. The importance of this declaration by God through Isaiah is basically this. As surely as the child in the womb is vulnerable, that's a key word here, and just as the newly born, starting its journey, vulnerable, so it is on the far end of life's journey, we become vulnerable again. At the extremes of life's calendar, God will be with us. But what if in my old age my memory is gone? God will be with us just as when as a baby and we had no consciousness of God, God was with us. But what about our responsibility in this matter of growing old? Well, here's the difference. There's no expectations of a baby about his or her relationship with God or what to do about that young age. But with growing older, as we will see, according to the Bible, there are, especially if we are at a place where we know we're growing old. First of all, just as a general orientation, what is the deportment of those who are older supposed to be according to Scripture? Listen to this from Titus 2, the first 3 verses.
"But as for you, teach what accords with sound doctrine. Older men are to be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled, sound in their faith, in love, and in steadfastness. Older women likewise are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good."
Yes, and there's more that Paul has to say about that if you want to look through Titus chapter 2. Of course, there are fun times and playful times to be had when older. But Paul's point is this. It is very important as we get older to be an example to the younger generation. It's an example that says there is a seriousness to the arc of life. The key is to be serious as we age without becoming cheerless. The generation that raised me would say this, and I heard this growing up. there goes old Jones. He sure knows how to age gracefully. And this is some of what Paul is talking about. However, arriving at that place where we've got to face the exit music is challenging. Let's start with 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 1.
When Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel.
He became old, and he decided he needed help. He needed some delegation of his authority. So he made his sons over Israel. So getting older, we delegate. It should be a natural process. Sometimes the years, though, dim our perspective, and we become old in a way that we haven't realized. So listen to verse 3.
Yet his sons did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice.
Samuel was no longer able to see what was going on. Older age will do that. So what happens, of course? The elders of Israel come to him, and in verses 4 or 5, they say to him,
Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, Behold, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations.
Right, and we know the outcome of this. They have rejected God as their king, as the Lord makes clear later on in that chapter in his conversation with Samuel. Later, Samuel announces his retirement, relinquishing his position as leader to Saul the king. And here's what he says when that takes place, 1 Samuel 12, verses 1 and 2.
And Samuel said to all Israel, Behold, I have obeyed your voice and all that you have said to me, and have made a king over you. And now, behold, the king walks before you. And I am old and gray, and behold, my sons are with you. I have walked before you from my youth until this day.
Yes, his declaration is, I've done what you've asked. I've always conducted my life openly and clearly before you. I'm now old and gray, and my life is an open book. My sons are here basically to testify to that. They may be corrupt, but they can say, Dad did what was right.
Yeah.
And I have walked before you, before my God, from my youth until this day. So Samuel acknowledges his age and accepts his altered state among the people of Israel. Sometimes we get old and we just can't let go of power and authority.
Yes.
He will, of course, serve God and Saul as well in a downsized way for a few more years before he passes and he is mourned and buried. Joshua also experienced old age and gave a final charge before he passed on. Listen to this from Joshua 23, verses 1 and 2.
A long time afterward, when the Lord had given rest to Israel from all their surrounding enemies, and Joshua was old and well advanced in years, Joshua summoned all Israel, its elders and its heads, its judges and officers, and said to them, I am now old and well advanced in years. I think some of it might be stating the obvious, right? As you get older, too.
Yeah, you'll notice how getting old, you have repetition of this. It starts off with Samuel was old. And then he says, I am old. It's the law of Moses. You establish something in 2 or 3 witnesses. So it's repeated twice. It's repeated twice here at Joshua. Notice it says that he's well advanced in years. Remember that phrase, because he is 110 when he finally dies.
That's well advanced.
That's well advanced. Keep that word advanced because we're going to compare it with some other adjectives applied to other people here shortly. So he doesn't want to wait to be too old or to be told that he's too old. So he's ahead of the game. Joshua 23:14.
And now I'm about to go the way of all the earth, and you know in your hearts and souls, all of you, that not one word has failed of all the good things that the Lord your God promised concerning you. All have come to pass for you, not one of them has failed.
Okay, I've completed my task, my purpose before God. I have this intuitive sense, as Psalm 90 will say as we read it in a little bit, fly away. So this knowledge has encouraged him to give that farewell speech to Israel, and we won't repeat the whole thing here, but the famous line, Joshua 24:15.
And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord.
Absolutely. So, good example of how to deal with getting old age, giving up authority, saying your final word with Joshua. There's a fellow also, this is interesting, Barzillai, and he's a good example of aging gracefully. This takes place when As we see, David and his entourage is leaving Jerusalem because there's been a coup in the kingdom. So listen now first to verses 32 and 33 of 2 Samuel 19.
Barzillai was a very aged man, 80 years old. He had provided the king with food while he stayed at Mahanaim, for he was a very wealthy man. And the king said to Barzillai, "Come over with me, and I will provide for you with me in Jerusalem."
Take a note of the description of Barzillai here. A very aged man, 80. Now, Joshua's well advanced in years. He dies at 110. But now we're at a little later down the pike, and things are moving more toward this 70 years or 80 maybe that we find in Psalm 90. He's now described as very aged at the age of 80. So he's not advanced in years, but he's an aged man. Now we're going to come back to that. Now David's son Absalom has usurped the throne. David's on the run when he meets up with Barzillai, and he encourages him to join the entourage leaving Jerusalem. But Barzillai declines for the following reasons, which Randy's going to read. Each one of these reasons is the problem that comes with old age, verses 34 and 35.
But Barzillai said to the king, "How many years have I still to live that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? On this day 80 years old. Can I discern what is pleasant and what is not? Can your servant taste what he eats and what he drinks? Can I still listen to the voice of singing men and singing women? Why then should your servant be an added burden to my lord the king?"
Yes, I've taken care of you by providing for you, but I'm not going to ask you to carry me in old age. That's a whole nother ball game. So Barzillai begs off. He's got one foot in the grave. He says, my discernment, I don't have my judgmental skills with me like I used to. Taste, well, old age can do it. I had COVID. That did it for me.
Yeah.
Hearing,
What?
hearing. How many times do I get an ad to buy a hearing aid in the mail since the 4 years I've been here?
Yeah, every day.
Every week.
Yeah, every day.
Yeah. Come down here and get fitted for a hearing aid. No, Barzillai says, I'll just be in the way. And he wants to go and die in familiar places and memories. So he gives his servant, David, this is how he delegates his authority, as a trustworthy replacement, which David accepts. Listen to verses 36 through 38.
Your servant will go a little way over the Jordan with the king. Why should the king repay me with such a reward? Please let your servant return that I may die in my own city near the grave of my father and my mother. But here is your servant Chinnam. Let him go over and my lord the king, and do for him whatever seems good to you. And the king answered, Chinnam shall go over with me, and I will do for him whatever seems good to you, and all that you desire for me I will do for you.
Great example. He's a good pattern for handling old age. He's downsizing, retiring from public service, putting his house in order because he knows his days remaining are few. We see that the elderly now, so far in these examples, when they're told they're old, they take the truth to heart and start a lifestyle change. Leaving positions of responsibility is at the top of the list for these changes. Now, is there a cutoff at any certain number of years? Or is there a place in the Bible where you got to be a certain age to do something, and then a certain age you got to stop doing it? Interesting. We have this, and it's interesting to look into. Let's hear Randy read from Numbers 4, first verses 1 through 3.
The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Take a census of the sons of Kohath from among the sons of Levi, by their clans and their fathers' houses, from 30 years old up to 50 years old, all who can come on duty to do the work in the tent of meeting.
Okay, so here you have to be 30, not 25, not 29. You got to be 30 years old to do this kind of work, taking care of the tabernacle, putting it up, taking it apart, covering it up, and all that. And at 50, after that, you're done.
You retire.
Okay?
Yeah.
So, what is this all about? Let's continue with verse 15.
And when Aaron and his sons have finished covering the sanctuary and all the furnishings of the sanctuary, as the camp sets out, after the sons of Kohath shall come to carry these, but they must not touch the holy things, lest they die. These are the things of the tent of meeting that the sons of Kohath are to carry.
So this is serious business. Serious business. The same age requirement is mandatory for the sons of Gershon, who also have their particular assignment to take care of the tabernacle, and the sons of Merari as well. They were given responsibilities concerning the tabernacle. But, they can't do it until they reach that age. that Randy just read. They got to be 30 years old at least. But at 50, they got to quit. It's a serious assignment. So why do we have these particular beginning dates and ending dates? Because number one, you have to be mature enough to know the seriousness of your assignment. And this was the age they picked, interestingly enough, 30. And you still got to be young enough to carry the equipment and not stumble and fall and shuffle around with it.
Physical strength.
Yeah. So at 50, it's over. It's sort of like commercial airline pilots have to be retired at 65.
Yeah.
There's been some debate about that, but as far as I know, it's still 65. What is the norm? We have the norm in Psalm 90, and Randy's going to read verse 10.
The years of our life are 70, or even by reason of strength 80. Yet their span is but both toil and trouble. They are soon gone, and we fly away.
Wow, and that's the truth. Note well the New English translation on that phrase, even by reason of strength 80, they translated, if one is especially strong, you make it to 80. And the span of our years, it means the best of our years, we still have issues and problems. And we get to 70, we've made it. If we get 80, it's by strength of years that we have the strength that's left. This is interesting because many years ago, when I was still young, I read a book about getting older because, you're in a ministry, you counsel and all that. And the fellow who wrote it said, you must understand that there is a world of difference between being 60 and being 80. Where I was at that time, I thought, well, that's interesting, but couldn't be that much.
Yeah.
Now, 3 months from being 80, I can
Is
look
there?
back and say, whoa, there is a great difference between 60 and 80.
Yeah.
And I can add to that book, there is a great difference between 70 and 80. Big difference. You can tell the diminishing of the strength. God blesses you still have strength, and Lord willing, I'll get there at 80 in 3 months. But absolutely, this psalm resonates with me completely. We watched the Capitol 4th celebration this past couple of weeks on TV, and one of the guests singing was Smokey Robinson. Smokey, which
Speaking of aged.
yeah. He's now 83.
Yeah.
And he was out there, and it wasn't recording. He used his own voice. Clearly, he doesn't have the resonance that he used to. But it was his voice. It sounded good, and he could move around a little on stage.
Mm-hmm.
It's great. But he's not going to venues now of thousands of people every night for 3 hours at a time.
Yeah.
That's over. That's not going to happen. Some of us hit 80 when we're 60. I've seen that in rest homes time and time again. I've seen people then, like good old Edna, who was over 100, bent over in her wheelchair, could not come up straight, almost deaf, because I had to talk to her like this, and blind. But her mind, till the day she died finally at 103 or 4, was as sharp as a tack. I could miss a week of visiting her, and she could pick up the conversation where we left. There's all kinds of parameters of getting old. Well, what if we were considering an age limit for the presidency? Well, this psalm tells us 70 might be a good cutoff date because it takes straight to get to 80. And even if you're good at 70, there's no guarantee when you hit 80, you're going to be like you were when you're 70.
Yeah.
Lots of things can happen. And no one in a position of great authority should have to be told, you're old, but you're not gold.
Mm-hmm.
I had an interesting thing when I was in my 60s, back when I was still ministering in Ohio, and I was performing a wedding for my nephew and his soon-to-be wife, and my brother-in-law was there. We hadn't seen each other for 20 years, and he was in a wheelchair at this time. His health was not good. He was obviously older than I was by probably, 15, 20 years. So I came over to see him and been over. And you understand, in Kentucky, I was called Gary. Over here in Ohio, down here in Tennessee, it's Jim or James. But I won't go into explain that. It's a long story. Anyway, his name was Dutch. So I bent over and I said, hello, Dutch. And he lifted up his head and he had this expression of surprise on his face. He said, Gary, you're old. And I thought, well, yeah, I'm not going to say a thing about you right now, but yeah, you're right. It happens. You can't stop it. And Aaron was 123-year-old when he died, according to the Bible. Another exception was Jehoiada, the priest who served Joash the king. Listen to his old age, 2 Chronicles 24, 15 and 16.
But Jehoiada grew old and full of days and died. He was 130 years old at his death, and they buried him in the city of David among the kings, because he had done good in Israel and toward God and his house.
Right. Seeing the role he played in the young life of King Joash, preserving him, he was the last good hope of the king on the throne of Judah and Jerusalem. And of course, he had his evil grandmother to contend with, and Jehoiada took care of all that.
Yeah.
So God apparently extended his life to complete that task. Now, one might think that David, too, would have lived to a ripe old age, and as described by the scripture, he did, but there is a catch here. Listen to this. First, let's start with 1 Kings, verse 1, 1 Kings chapter 1, first 3 verses.
Now King David was old and advanced in years, and although they covered him with clothes, he could not get warm. Therefore his servants said to him, Let a young woman be sought for my lord the king, and let her wait on the king and be in his service. Let her lie in your arms, that my lord the king may be warm. So they sought for a beautiful young woman throughout all the territory of Israel, and found Abishag the Shunammite, and brought her to the king.
Yes, he was old and advanced in years, but not like Joshua, as we're going to find out. Joshua lived to be 110. We're going to find out that's different with David. And we need to discuss a little bit. He was old and advanced in years. What does that mean? Because we're going to see he died at 70. All right. Now, Barzillai was old in years at 80. And now we'll show how he gets to be 70, dies. But let's take a look at verse 15 now.
So Bathsheba went to the king in his chamber. Now the king was very old, and Abishag the Shunammite was attending to the king.
Very old, yes. And the point here is, when you get older, heat leaves your body. Heat leaves your body. And the first place you notice it is in your feet. You get cold feet.
Oh.
So he couldn't keep warm. And some older people have that problem. And so they had this young lady, who apparently was a very warm person, share the body heat. Well, David sounds like he would be Barzillai's age, right? We've already discussed. He would be 80. So how old was David when he died? Well, we got to put a couple scriptures together, but it's all interesting and tells us something about aging and how we live our lives. 1 Kings 2, verse 11.
And the time that David reigned over Israel was 40 years. He reigned 7 years in Hebron and 33 years in Jerusalem.
All right, so that's 40 years. Okay, now let's take a look at 2 Samuel 5, verses 4 and 5.
David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. At Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and at Jerusalem he reigned over all Israel and Judah 33 years.
All right, so he was 70.
Yeah.
He was 70 when he died. But yet he is said to be really old, very old. Okay, so how do we reconcile this? Now let's go to 1 Chronicles 29, verses 26 through 28.
Thus David the son of Jesse reigned over all Israel. The time that he reigned over Israel was 40 years. He reigned 7 years in Hebron and 33 years in Jerusalem. Then he died at a good age, full of days, rich and honor, and Solomon his son reigned in his place.
He died at a good age, and I would say a good age for him, full of days. So how are we going to understand this? Is 70 a good old age to die? Here's the key. He was full of days. What does he mean by this? Here's a clue from one of my favorite films, Raiders of the Lost Ark. There's a scene in the Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Marion is attending to the wounds of Indiana Jones, Indy, and conversation is started, and she says to him, "You're not the man I knew 10 years ago." And Indy says, "It's not the years, honey, but the mileage." And that's why David was full of days. He had mileage on him. Think of all the battles he was in. He was a man of war. He had blood on his hands. That is why he couldn't build the temple. 1 Chronicles 28, verses 2 and 3.
Then King David rose to his feet and said, "Hear me, my brothers and my people. I had it in my heart to build a house of rest for the ark of the covenant of the Lord and for the footstool of our God. And I made preparations for building. But God said to me, You may not build a house for my name, for you are a man of war and have shed blood."
There you go. Now, someone might say, but didn't God direct him in those wars? Some of them. But if you read 1 Samuel carefully, and Kings and all that, you will find sometimes David went out on his own and just took out people, whether he was justified or not. But God's point was, you've done a lot of killing, and therefore you can't do it. So by the time he hit 70, he is worn out. He is worn out. So what happens is, in this old age situation he's in, full of days, he was roused from his old age, cold, dying life, to tend to the possible coup that would keep Solomon from becoming king. You can read all about this in 1 Kings chapter 1. And that's his last duty. So with some clever help from his courtly circle, he takes care of that and then gives Solomon the final charge of how to take care of business, how to tie up loose ends. It reads something like a Godfather kind of conclusion. So he dies. David dies. 1 Kings 2, verse 1 and 10.
When David's time to die drew near, he commanded Solomon his son, saying, Then David slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David.
Yes, I'm about to go the way of all earth, he says. And he fell asleep. So David ends his life full of days, but he had aged considerably more than others and he was no longer really competent to lead because he's got to spend time getting warm. They had to look for him. They have to rouse him up when it looked like they're going to have this possible coup, and he has to come forth and be alert, and he does accomplish that, and then he passes away. So how does Solomon fare? Now, here's a case where when you're looking at scriptures for a particular reason from a different slant, things stand out like they didn't before. It was so with me with this passage because I'm familiar with this passage, read it before. But listen to this, 1 Kings 11, first 4 verses.
Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women, from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, You shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn your heart away after other gods. Solomon clung to these in love. He had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father.
When Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart after other gods. And it is so with some men. They get to be, I think the culture term is sugar daddies or whatever you want to call it, but they indulge the women in their life and are not as, or Silly said, I can't discern now between this and that. I don't have that kind of perspective anymore. And Solomon let that happen.
He lost that discerning.
Because in old age, he should have had more sense, but he didn't. He failed. He invited the fox of idolatry into the henhouse. And it wasn't until he was old that he was undone. And as he got old and older, he gave into the wiles of his wives who wanted the gods they loved. Now, here's a proverb, not the Bible, but I've heard it all my life, and it's so true. There's no fool like an old fool. Except the old fool, who is a fool, doesn't know he's a fool. Solomon should have listened to the psalmist of Psalm 71. It's a great one. I recommend reading the whole thing, but we're just going to do verses 17 and 18.
O God, from my youth you have taught me, and I still proclaim your wondrous deeds. So even to old age and gray hairs, O God, do not forsake me, until I proclaim your might to another generation, your power to all those to come.
The final living witness to those who will journey the path of decline. God's might will be with you. That's what he wants to proclaim. He's heard the preacher, that's the man from Ecclesiastes, who in his final chapter says, From your youth, young people, you should be doing this. Listen to Ecclesiastes 12, verse 1.
Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them.
Yeah, evil days meaning you begin to shut down. I have no pleasure in them. And the rest of that chapter is one of the best descriptions in ancient literature of old age falling apart. And I remember when Edna, lady I mentioned earlier, passed away and I did her funeral, that's the passage I read. It's the only time ever doing a funeral I read that because she fit it.
Yeah.
She had declined, nothing to work anymore. God bless her. And then she flew away. Well, those of us moving toward the Davidic magic number of 70, and if by strength we have it to reach to 80, we need to heed this truth that we just heard in Psalm 71. That's the Christian expectation. If we do, this can be the outcome. And this is regularly in the Psalm, my prayer life, and my wife and I, we have our prayers. We reference this frequently. And Psalm 92, and these are the verses I'm referring to, 12 through 15.
The righteous flourish like the palm tree and grow like a cedar in Lebanon. They are planted in the house of the Lord. They flourish in the courts of our God. They still bear fruit in old age. They are ever full of sap and green, to declare that the Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there is no unrighteousness in him.
They are like green trees, palm trees, and they're full of sap. Some of us are more full of it than others. And we're green, and we have this testimony. The Lord is upright. He is my rock. There's no unrighteousness in him, because by the time you reach that age, that should be clear as a bell. And that's your testimony in that age. What is the main blessing of old age that everybody should aspire to? Wisdom. Wisdom. Job 12, verses 11 through 13.
Does not the ear test words as the palate tastes food? Wisdom is with the aged, and understanding and length of days. With God are wisdom and might. He has counsel and understanding.
Right. Wisdom is available for all. And of course, as we grow older, we need to be incorporating into our lifestyle, searching for wisdom. Proverbs 2, verses 1 through 5. Listen to this.
My son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding. Yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it as for hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God.
Absolutely. It's a treasure hunt, and it takes exertion and effort and sweat and tears, but you form that going through life, and it will be a blessing as you get older for sure. And of course, there's always James 1:5, that if you're stumped, ask for wisdom and God grants it. Just make sure you follow through. James makes that clear. He says, don't be like waves that are tossed to and fro. Don't be doubting. If you ask for wisdom, expect to get it and act accordingly. Psalm 90, verse 12, the verse is right after that verse that Randy read earlier, that, the days of our years are 70, or if by strength 80. The best of them have toil and trouble, and soon we fly away. The next one is, teach us therefore to number our days. That's the best wisdom of all. Number our days so we can know what numbered day we're in. But what is the grief of old age, as we can come to a conclusion here, when it comes to wisdom? People, especially younger people, don't listen. These days, of course, in a culture devoted to youth and lust, elderly wisdom is a joke. Well, hold on. It was in Solomon's time a joke as well. Listen to this, 1 Kings 12, first 5 verses.
Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. And as soon as Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, heard of it, for he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon, then Jeroboam returned from Egypt. And they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and said to Rehoboam, your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke on us, and we will serve you. He said to them, go away for 3 days, then come again to me. So the people went away.
All right. So what is it they want? They don't want any more hard service. Now, to know what he's talking about are those people there. When they talk to Rehoboam, just go back and read 1 Kings chapter 5, especially verses through 13 through 18. Solomon impressed people. He drafted them into the service of labor for all his extensive building programs. And they got more grand and bigger and bigger. And it took it took a lot of hard labor. So Rehoboam does the good thing. All right. Gonna go talk to the old guys, old heads. They know what's happening. All right. Listen to this. 1 Kings 12, verses 6 and 7.
Then King Rehoboam took counsel with the old men who had stood before Solomon his father while he was still alive, saying, how do you advise me to answer this people? And they said to him, if you will be a servant to this people today and serve them and speak good words to them when you answer them, then they will be your servants forever.
So the old guys say, the elders, the people of wisdom, which Job says that's what old life is. If you're paying attention, you get wisdom. No radical changes. Get to know the people. Then do what's good. Find it out and do it. Be proverbial. Be patient. Listen. Be just. Micah, in his book, says it very easily, very little later. Do what's right. Be merciful. And that's what they're asking for. Mercy. Because Solomon in the later years, was not merciful. And walk humbly with your God. Now, Solomon started out humble. Remember, he said, I'm but a child, Lord, so give me wisdom. But that's, as we see, that's not where he ended up. So, what did he do? Let's look at 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 8 and 9.
But he abandoned the counsel that the old men gave him and took counsel with the young men who had grown up with him and stood before him. And he said to them, what do you advise that we answer this people who have said to me, lighten the yoke that your father put on us?
Yes, and then the next few verses, basically, he says, my dad used whips on you, I'll use scorpions on you. You know.
You thought he was tough.
You thought he was tough. You haven't seen tough yet. You haven't seen hard labor yet. And so, verse 13.
And the king answered the people harshly and forsaking the counsel that the old men had given him.
Yeah, he forsook the wise counsel of the old guys and it split the kingdom. The kingdom split and headed toward the inevitable judgment of God. The old men, I am sure, wept. So, how old is too old? When we, by God's grace, come to know it's time to give up some things and let others step in. And in my life, I've seen that's hard to do. Guys get older driving cars. When the time comes you realize I should stop this, you got to stop it. Now, there have been those who won't give up the keys. Then you have to deal with it. Now, my father, he just came in one day and he was driving pretty good and he was 90, but his hearing was going, so he couldn't, the traffic. So he just gave me the keys and said, drive. You drive from now on. I'm done. And that's the way you should do it. So how old is too old? Well, we've got to ask God to give us insight, wisdom. If we have family, faithful family and friends, they will tell us. But the beauty of old age is the wisdom of understanding of seeing one's life that has been moved through the providence of God. That's my testimony. It's a great and grand satisfaction. Listen to this, Proverbs 16:9, which I have shared with more than one person in the last 2-3 years.
The heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps.
Yes. Or as the NLT says, we can make our plans, but the Lord decides our steps. And when I look back on my life, that's absolutely the case. And there is so much wisdom to be gained from that. To arrive at the termination date of Psalm 90, 70, or if by strength of years 80, and to be able to look back and see the footsteps of Jesus guiding ours is to see a pattern of wisdom carrying us to old age and beyond, Buzz Lightyear, to infinity and beyond. A wisdom that we can share with the next generation, a wisdom that is the power of God. And that's the Christian expectation.
Well, thanks, Jim. And by the way, you're not old.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm feeling fairly young right now.
Good. Young at heart.
Yeah.
And perhaps you might have questions or comments about our episode today. If you would like, please shoot us an email at eventsandexpectations@gmail.com or put the question in the comments. We will always answer you. This has been Current Events and Christian Expectations. And until next time, keep looking up.